It was a terrible night for poor people, for the middle class, for seniors who rely on Social Security, for our allies in Ukraine, for NATO, for the truth and democracy and decency. And it was a terrible night for everyone who voted against him. And guess what? It was a bad night for everyone who voted for him, too. You just don't realize it yet.
You know what? If I ever cry on TV, it'll be because Maroon 5 put out a new song. But that's it. You big Now,
when Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld joined forces, Jimmy Kimmel didn't just get roasted, he got obliterated. In a tag team takedown that no one saw coming, Rogan called out Kimmel's Hollywood hypocrisy while Gutfeld shredded his late night legacy. It wasn't a debate, it was a demolition. The former comedy king found himself the punchline as two of the media's boldest voices exposed the cracks in his carefully curated persona. This wasn't just criticism, it was a reckoning, and Kimmel never saw it coming.
Oh, I have a few names to add. CNN, MSNBC, CBS, the town crier. All outlets ignoring Biden's revolving door of gaps. His constant forgetfulness, weird rambling speeches being let off stage. All the while you told us there's nothing to see here.
Jimmy Kimmel used to be dangerous, not in the threat to society way, but in the he might say something hilarious and offensive on TV way. Back in the day, he was the guy who laughed at everything, pushed buttons, and wore irreverence like armor. But somewhere along the way, the edge got dull, the suit got tighter, and the jokes started sounding suspiciously like they were cleared by HR. Cue Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld, two men who live on opposite ends of the late night spectrum. One operates from a gritty Fight Club podcast studio with a whiskey bottle nearby. The other roasts the establishment nightly while sipping espresso with a grin.
Had a real problem with Elon from the beginning of this thing, but it's like he's in this leftist thought bubble. He is in the most leftist thought bubble available, which is Hollywood. And, you know, and I think also, you know, he famously, there's some videos of him in blackface, and those came out, and he had apologized for them, and I think he took that hit and like really doubled down the other direction. I mean, that's just speculation. But
neither of them is exactly worried about fitting into Hollywood cocktail parties. So when they both aimed at Jimmy Kimmel, it wasn't just a critique, it was a dissection. Rogan, known for his brutal honesty and ironclad nonsense detector, didn't mince words. He saw Kimmel as the prime example of what happens when comedians stop being funny and start becoming moral lecturers. The evolution of Kimmel from prankster to sanctimonious sermonizer, Rogan framed it as a tragic loss, not for Kimmel, but for comedy itself.
There's not a chance in hell that this is funny. When you see those flat, corny, late-night monologue jokes, Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Fallon, what they're doing is just like reading off of a teleprompter. There's applause signs, and then there's producers. There's the warm-up guy that's literally telling people to clap. They're like, okay, explaining to the people, okay, when Jimmy comes out, I want a big round of applause. Let's practice this right now. Ladies and gentlemen, Jimmy Fallon. Yeah. And everybody
practice it.
Yes.
He painted a picture of a man who used to joke about anything and everything, now acting as if he's auditioning for sainthood. But Rogan didn't stop there. He dissected Kimmel's recent bits, pointing out that the jokes felt less like comedy and more like applause lines. Less ha and more yas king. He questioned whether Kimmel even believed what he was saying anymore, or if he was simply clinging to relevance through political alignment. Meanwhile, Greg Gutfeld approached the takedown with his signature cocktail of sarcasm and deadpan savagery. For Gutfeld, Kimmel represented the very decay of late-night television. The monologues that once had bite now felt like they were copied and pasted from a CNN opinion column. Gutfeld mocked Kimmel's teary-eyed sincerity, asking why every episode felt like a therapy session with a man who regrets everything he once laughed at. The funniest part? Gutfeld didn't even raise his voice. He just calmly, almost joyfully pointed out the absurdity. Kimmel, the same guy who once hosted The Man Show, was now lecturing Americans about decency and morality. That's like Ozzy Osbourne scolding people for playing music too loud. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast.
And impossible.
In this case, because the poor sportsmanship is coming from TV, normally I would say you can have one lap and smell your flowers, but go ahead and take four. Because there's nobody going, oh, that's wrong. It's not. You have to be either on Instagram or TikTok to be the outrage. So it's the same thing, and shame on them just do your job, Jimmy.
Yeah.
You know, like, I know it's hard to do, but do your job.
Amen.
But keep, you know what? No. Jimmy, keep doing what you're doing, because I love being number one.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets brutal. Rogan and Gutfeld weren't just roasting Kimmel's recent jokes or his ideological shift. They were questioning whether he had a spine left, whether the real Kimmel still existed beneath the Hollywood polish and scripted sincerity. To them, he wasn't a comedian anymore. He was a host. Just a host. A safe, compliant, pre-approved dispenser of chuckles and talking points. This double-barreled assault came at a time when late-night TV was already struggling. Ratings were down, audiences were bored, and the formula had become painfully predictable. And here you had two guys, neither of whom played by the traditional rules, shining a spotlight on just how stale the old guard had become. Rogan, always the conversational bulldozer, didn't just slam Kimmel for being preachy. He questioned the entire premise of comedy that needs to be approved by a political filter. He talked about how comedians should be free-range animals, not house-trained pets. And in his eyes, Kimmel had traded the wild unpredictability of real comedy for the safe applause of the morally smug. Gutfeld, of course, had receipts.
The killer phrase was at the end when Kimmel said, "You just don't realize it." Because you see, he's smarter than you, and he needs you to know that. And his ego can't bear that there's someone out there more famous and more influential than him. I got news for you, Kimmel. The last time you mattered, Bruce Jenner still had a penis.
This wasn't some vague, half-baked opinion tossed out for shock value. No, Gutfeld came prepared like a prosecutor at trial. He didn't just talk about Kimmel's transformation, he showed it. He played clips from the old days when Kimmel was wild, unfiltered, and funny. Moments from The Man Show that had aged like milk, but still served a purpose. They were relics from a time when Kimmel didn't care who he offended as long as the joke landed. Then Gutfeld fast-forwarded to present-day Kimmel, buttoned up, somber, more likely to cry than crack a punchline. He juxtaposed the old and the new, not to shame Kimmel for evolving, but to expose the how and why behind the shift. And it wasn't flattering. The comparison was brutal, and it didn't need heavy-handed commentary. The audience could see it. The transformation was undeniable. And worse, it felt disingenuous. Gutfeld laughed hard, not just because the contrast was absurd, but because it was symbolic. It was a masterclass in media evolution gone sideways. The rebel had become a reverend, the prankster had become a preacher, and the crowd didn't just laugh along with Gutfeld, they understood.
That right now, they're melting like that stick of butter Joy Behar keeps between her thighs to prevent chafing. Case in point, last night, all the other late-night hosts threw a hissy fit. It's too bad Tim Waltz is still grieving, or he could send them all a sack of industrial-strength tampons. Poor Jimmy. True, it was a terrible night for women, children, and for the hundreds of thousands of hard-working immigrants who cut his lawn.
Even those who once loved Kimmel felt that strange tug of recognition. Something had changed. Not just the jokes, not just the tone, but the spirit of the man himself. And then came the silence. Not from Gutfeld, and certainly not from Rogan, but from Kimmel, the guy who used to throw haymakers at every critic, who once reveled in media brawls. Now, nothing. No tweet, no slide jab in a monologue, no deflective joke with a wink. Just absolute radio silence. In an era where public figures are practically required to clap back within 24 hours of any insult, Kimmel's silence wasn't noble. It was suspicious. The man who made a career off speaking up suddenly had nothing to say. And in the brutal logic of media optics, that kind of silence doesn't read as strategic. It reads as surrender. The internet, of course, noticed immediately. Memes started circulating. Headlines speculated. Fans on both sides took it as a signal. Kimmel's defenders tried to spin the silence as taking the high road, but even they knew it didn't land, because this wasn't a one-off insult. This was a full-on public dissection, and the subject of the autopsy didn't even blink. Silence in this case wasn't classy. It was damning. It made it look like Kimmel didn't have a defense. Or worse, that he knew Gutfeld and Rogan were right and simply chose to pretend it never happened. But pretending doesn't work in the age of viral commentary. People don't forget. And the longer Kimmel stayed quiet, the louder the critique echoed. Online forums buzzed. Where's Jimmy? Became a joke in itself. YouTube clips of Gutfeld's takedown racked up millions of views. Reddit threads dissected the psychological implications of Kimmel's retreat. It wasn't just a news story. story. It became a moment, a shift, a turning point, because in that silence, people didn't just see a man avoiding conflict. They saw a fallen icon, unsure of how to face what he had become. Meme pages lit up, comment sections exploded, fans of Rogan and Gutfeld relished the moment, declaring the death of woke comedy and hailing the return of real talk. Even neutral observers started wondering aloud, had Kimmel lost his edge, or had Rogan and Gutfeld simply called out what everyone else was afraid to admit?
Road to obscurity. Nobody's going to care anymore. It's like you're seeing it take place with late night television. Nobody gives a fuck about it anymore.
I know.
And it's slowly, you have a bad business model and you're not adapting.
Yeah, the creativity's gone for late night comedy, right? Like, that's not really a thing anymore.
But this wasn't just about one celebrity spat. This was about something bigger. It was about the identity crisis in comedy, about what happens when once fearless voices trade risk for relevance. Rogan and Gutfeld weren't just throwing shade. They were firing flares into a sky already full of smoke. Their message was simple. Comedy shouldn't ask permission, and when it does, it stops being comedy. Rogan's fans were quick to rally. For them, this wasn't new. He's been the anti-woke, free speech champion for years. Gutfeld's audience, meanwhile, felt vindicated. They'd been screaming from the sidelines that late-night TV had gone soft, and now their guy was proving it on air, night after night. As for Kimmel's defenders, they tried. They posted old clips. They tweeted about growth and evolution. But the damage was done. The contrast was too sharp. The guy who once dressed in blackface for laughs was now giving TED Talks disguised as monologues. You could call it maturity. Rogan and Gutfeld called it hypocrisy, and they said it with such precision there was almost no room left for argument.
They think we're stupid. Kimmel thinks he's smarter than everyone, and
Right.
and it just, that's exactly what he just said. And to just be full, I guess, transparency, when he was crying, they had just showed him his ratings, and so it wasn't necessarily all about that. Wait, isn't it a little one-sided though? That by the way, I felt so much better with all the things you described. I do suffer from those. You know what cured them? Tuesday night. Tuesday night cured them. They came out with it said like how to cope with a loss.
Yeah.
What about us? What about how to cope with a win?
Yeah.
What about us? They say deep breathing, and they say have you ever heard name your feelings?
And in the world of Rogan and Gutfeld, that's the ultimate betrayal. They didn't just go after Kimmel's jokes. They went after the soul of his comedy, and they left claw marks. Even longtime Kimmel fans started whispering the unthinkable. Maybe they're right. Maybe the Kimmel of today isn't the same guy who laughed at everything and apologized for nothing. Maybe the fire's gone, or maybe, just maybe, the fire was doused by too many red carpets, too many virtue signals, and too few real laughs. But this wasn't just about nostalgia. It was a sharp look at trajectory, momentum, and authenticity. Kimmel isn't evolving. He's preserving, carefully curated, corporately polished, and strategically risk-averse. He's coasting on the fumes of a rebellious past while navigating a sanitized present built for network comfort. Meanwhile, Rogan and Gutfeld are out in the wilderness, machetes in hand, carving up the culture in real time. Their paths are erratic, their jokes unfiltered, their presence unpredictable. But that unpredictability, it feels alive. It's raw, it's messy, and it's real. So what did this takedown really expose? Maybe it wasn't just entertainment gossip.
Look at Kimmel and Colbert. They're wrecks because they believe the media. And yet, we're fine because we weren't brainwashed. We know the media's job is to lie, to create anxiety out of proportion to the actual threat or no threat at all. Journalists really only need to give you one tip to manage stress, and that's stop paying attention to journalists. Maybe these late night losers will stop thinking that the world is ending.
Maybe it was a mirror held up to an entire genre. Late night, once the domain of misfits and provocateurs, now risked becoming a graveyard of safe monologues and approved laughter. The clash wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. A warning even. Conformity may pay, but it rarely inspires. If nothing else, the moment revealed a brutal truth. In comedy, survival isn't about playing it safe or fitting into a mold. It's about provocation, risk, and refusing to apologize for hitting nerves. Rogan and Gutfeld aren't flawless. They stumble, they overstep, they stir chaos, but they try. They take swings that might land awkwardly, but at least they swing. That recklessness, that edge, keeps them relevant and unpredictable. Kimmel, meanwhile, has settled into the role of a network darling, smiling, scripted, safe. He's broadcasting from a bunker, not a battlefield. And while safety might earn applause from execs and critics, it doesn't spark conversation. It doesn't shake the room. In today's hyperreactive media jungle, safe isn't comforting, it's forgettable. And in comedy, forgettable is fatal.